This is DW News live from Berlin. Vladimir Putin delivers his much-anticipated State of the Nation speech. The Russian president has been addressing his country's foreign and domestic priorities. We will go live to Moscow. Also coming up, the UN's aid chief warns that Aleppo risks becoming a giant graveyard. Tens of thousands are trying to flee as the government makes further gains in the rebel-held east of the city. And on World AIDS Day, we take a look at the struggle of activists in China campaigning on behalf of those living with the virus. I'm Sarah Kelly. Thank you very much for joining us. We begin in Moscow, where Russian President Vladimir Putin is delivering his annual State of the Nation address. The international community will have been listening closely to what he had to say regarding Russia's involvement in the Syria conflict. There's also been anticipation about his remarks on Russia's relations with the West, fresh off the heels of Donald Trump's election victory in the United States. Well, correspondent Aaron Tilton has been following Putin's speech, and he joins us now from Moscow. So, Aaron, what have we heard so far?
Well, his speech so far, the speech of Vladimir Putin has been quite surprising. Now, typically in the past, he's been focusing more on international issues, but so far he's been speaking for over an hour and has focused entirely on issues, internal issues that are confronting the Russian government. He specifically spoke about the economy and the weak nature of economic growth in the country.
Are we expecting any major changes in policy? We're told that he's supposed to focus on foreign policy in particular toward the end of the speech.
Well, right now, we really don't know what to expect. Dmitry Peskov, the state government speaker, said that this speech was going to surprise a lot of people. And really, at least most advisors here and most experts we've been talking to seem to not really kind of expect this intense focus on internal problems. Now, we've heard so far that the Russian government is going to be investing billions in rebuilding the country's economic, educational, and education systems moving forward. Specifically, said the largest problems facing the country were internal ones. The lack of investment, the lack of modern technology and professional qualifications for its workers. So at least from what people have been expecting here in Moscow, this wasn't what we were expecting to hear.
Aaron Tilton with the latest from Moscow. We thank you very much for breaking it down for us. Let's turn to some other news now, because Syrian government forces are continuing their push into eastern Aleppo and other areas of the country. They are reportedly making gains against the rebels and the so-called Islamic State. An emergency meeting of the UN Security Council has discussed the situation. The UN's humanitarian chief told the council that parties to the conflict have ignored the rules of war and are willing to do anything to gain a military advantage. Our first report contains images that viewers may find disturbing.
It is an all-out battle. The Syrian government forces are relentlessly bombarding the rebel-held east of Aleppo. They hit families as they try to flee the areas being shelled. Civil defense volunteers known as the White Helmets say dozens of people were killed in attacks on Wednesday. My mother was carrying some things, then we suddenly heard the strike. We ran over to find them. My mother was dead, my sister was dead, my other sister was alive. We don't know how she is, she's still in hospital. What can I say? This is what God wanted. The UN's humanitarian chief called on the Security Council to step up and protect those in eastern Aleppo before there's no one left to protect.
For the sake of humanity, we call on, we plead with the parties and those with influence to do everything in their power to protect civilians and enable access to the besieged part of eastern Aleppo before it becomes one giant graveyard.
But Russia, Syria's key ally, is refusing to back a resolution calling for a ceasefire in Aleppo. Mr. President, we share the grave concerns of the plight of civilians in eastern Aleppo, but easing their suffering won't happen by ceasing the counter-terrorist operation. Leaving Syria and Iraq a terrorist caliphate and calling for humanism for terrorists is no alternative. As Syrian troops advance further into eastern Aleppo, tens of thousands of people have fled to the government-controlled western parts of the city. There, it is relatively safe. But others remain trapped by opposition fighters and by heavy shelling. Many more are likely to die as the battle for Aleppo slowly crawls to a bloody end.
Well, let's bring in now Aya Haraz. She is in the Turkish town of Gaziantep near the Syrian border. Thank you very much for being with us. You are in touch with people in eastern Aleppo. What are they telling you?
Well, I'm speaking to a mother on the ground now, and she still remains in the besieged area of Aleppo, and she's saying that her entire apartment is crowded with other families that have fled. She's saying there's no water, no fuel, and food will run out in a matter of days. In fact, she says that she shares only one meal a day with her daughter, and that meal consists of expired children's food. So the conditions are terrible, especially since it's cold now. And she's saying they're tearing down doors and any material that they can use for fire.
And can these civilians leave? Because we're hearing that some people are coming under fire when they try to escape. Some have even been killed.
Exactly. I mean, when I spoke to a teacher on the ground, he said that they have very dark choices to make. They either stay in the besieged area of Aleppo and risk death, or even risk death as they try to escape to Western Aleppo, as we've seen yesterday. Or even if they do reach Western Aleppo in safety, they risk imprisonment, arrest, and possibly torture. And he said that some of his friends' relatives had managed to reach Western Aleppo yesterday. And after a while on that same day, all the men of that family had been arrested and taken in by the Shabiha, which is the secret service in Syria, and they've never been heard of. After that, they have no idea where they are at the moment.
And what other challenges are facing those people who do manage to get out?
Well, like I mentioned, when they do manage to get out and when they do manage to reach these regime areas, they risk imprisonment, maybe arrest by the regime, because they are seen as spies, they're seen as allies of the FSA, and they're seen as allies of the rebels. So they're not considered to be safe citizens who arrive in Western Aleppo. But also, I mean, there's no hospitals that they can reach to for safety. All the hospitals have been bombed out of service, and there's only one trauma unit that remains in Aleppo to receive any wounded or any who are trying to reach sanctuary in Aleppo.
We want to thank you very much for your reporting, Aya Haraz, in the Turkish town of Gaziantep near the Syrian border. Let's turn to some other news now, because the plane that crashed in Colombia carrying a young Brazilian football team had run out of fuel. Those were the pilot's final words as the plane descended. Colombian media played an audio recording of those last moments. On it, the aircraft's pilot can be heard saying that in addition to running out of fuel, the plane had suffered an electrical failure. Now, the disaster on Monday killed 71 people. Only 6 survived, including 3 from the Chapecoense soccer squad. Meanwhile, a vigil has been held in Colombia in memory of the victims of the crash. The service took place in the city of Medellin, where Chapecoense were due to play against local side Atlético Nacional. Thousands of people turned out at the team's stadium to pay their respects on the day that the two sides were supposed to face off in the first leg of the Copa Sudamericana final. So many people wanted to show their support and love for the victims. There simply wasn't enough room for all of them inside of that stadium. This was the scene outside of the arena. Check this out, because thousands of people gathered to pay tribute. An incredible gesture of companionship and love, this man tweeted from Medellin. And that show of solidarity has so moved Brazilians that they're now paying Colombians back with their own tributes on Twitter using the hashtag Gracias Colombia, or Thank You Colombia. Like this user who tweeted, "What a wonderful people, the Colombians. What a gesture of affection for Brazil. What a gesture of humanity." Brazilian journalist Andressa Xavier expressed her gratitude with this tweet, calling the outpouring of support a glimmer of hope in the middle of such a bad thing. Humanity is not lost. Good people exist. Well, today is World AIDS Day, an opportunity to draw attention to one of the most destructive pandemics in history. People affected by HIV/AIDS have long been the victims of prejudice. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is calling for them to receive better treatment and protection, but a strong stigma attached to being HIV positive remains in many countries. China is one of them.
This bad weather isn't stopping Liu Shi from carrying out his work. Today, he's on a special mission in the center of Shanghai. We're speaking out against ignorance and discrimination against people who are HIV positive. Liu Shi and the other activists walk through the city in small groups. It's a way of spreading their message that avoids drawing the attention of the authorities, always sensitive when it comes to demonstrations. The group go to several locations across the city. It's a strategy that's not without risks. Their presence on the streets might escape official scrutiny, but the photos they post online could also attract attention. Liu Shi works for the organisation Beijing Gender. He writes information brochures about living with HIV and gives talks in schools. Liu is 24 years old and was diagnosed with HIV 4 years ago. When I found out about my infection, I stayed completely calm. I simply decided that I didn't want to live anymore, and I planned all of the details of my suicide. But a friend held him back from carrying out his plan, and after that, Liu decided to share his experience. Educating others about living with HIV has become his vocation. There are difficulties everywhere, at work, in life. Those who are infected lose their jobs and are evicted from their apartments. Some doctors even refuse to treat them. There's discrimination in many areas of life. It's problems like these that the Chinese HIV activists want to bring to the attention of people in Shanghai. It's desperately needed. Both Chinese society and the Chinese government have little understanding of how to deal with people who are HIV positive. That makes the work of people like Liu Shu all the more important, but means they tread a narrow line between bringing attention to their cause and drawing unwanted attention from the authorities.
Let's turn to some sports news now, because Norwegian chess champion Magnus Carlsen has retained his title in a thrilling climax to the World Chess Championship, but only after being pushed to the limit by his Russian challenger, Sergei Karyakin. Now, Carlsen won in the final phase of 4 quick-fire games after the two men tied in the first 12 regular matches. Organizers say that about 6 million people followed this championship.
It takes a special kind of person to be a chess world champion. Magnus Carlsen displays all the patience and brainpower needed to excel in the age-old pursuit. But the Norwegian also has a rebellious streak. During the championship, he often barely looked at reporters in news conferences. His self-confidence and calm under pressure have set him apart, especially when he was trailing against his challenger.
Can you give microphone?
I mean, it's not a very comfortable situation, of course, but I think the way I have to think about it is I have to win 1 game out of 3, and normally that's something I'm capable of doing.
He did get the win he needed to level the scores, meaning it all came down to tie breaks. And this stylish Norwegian, who has modelled clothes on the side, was far too cool a customer to be beaten.
You're watching DW News. Still to come on the program, after the death of their beloved King Bhumibol, the people of Thailand prepare to welcome a new monarch. We will get the details from our correspondent in Bangkok. Back in a minute. Don't go away. You're watching DW. reminder of our top stories. The UN's humanitarian chief has warned that Aleppo risks becoming a giant graveyard as intense fighting continues between government and rebel forces. At emergency talks in New York, Syrian opposition members urged the UN to do what it can to protect civilians. And happening now, Russian President Vladimir Putin has just given his annual State of the Nation address in Moscow. He says that Russia is ready to take part in solving global problems and that it does not want a confrontation. Let's bring in correspondent Aaron Tilton, who has been following Putin's speech for us from Moscow. So, Aaron, what do we make of these latest remarks?
Well, Vladimir Putin just wrapped up his speech, and as we were discussing earlier, his speech today really tended to focus on internal issues and the economic issues facing Russia. He said the biggest challenges were of an internal economic nature and that Russia in the long term needs to focus on rebuilding its own economic infrastructure, encourage investment, and actually improve the medical and educational facilities throughout the country. He only briefly touched on international issues. It really wasn't the focus of what he was discussing today. However, he said he's more than willing to seek a friendly relationship with the new incoming American government under President-elect Trump, and also said that while he was looking for friendly relations with the European Union and also with the United States, that in the long term Russia sees its international focus shifting more to Asia. He said that it's a long-term shift, and he sees in the long run relations with China, India, and even Japan as being more key for Russia's role on the international scene.
Okay, Aaron Tilton with the latest from Moscow. We want to thank you very much. And just to remind our viewers, Russia saying that it is ready for cooperation with the new U.S. leadership. That was Vladimir Putin speaking just moments ago in his annual State of the Union address. A change of pace now. We're going to head over to Christoph Kober with the latest from the business world. And he's talking about the oil output cut heard round the world. We are talking OPEC.
That's right, Sarah. Up 13% within 2 days. That's what the price of Brent crude looks like today. For the first time in 8 years, the world's top oil producers have decided to cut output starting January. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries had failed repeatedly to reach a consensus as the price of oil plummeted and its credibility was at stake.
When the Saudi oil minister arrived at the OPEC meeting in Vienna on Wednesday, he announced he was not leaving without a deal. And he got one. Starting on the 1st of January, OPEC member states have pledged to slash production by 1.2 million barrels a day. Saudi Arabia will take the lion's share of cuts, but other countries such as Iraq and Kuwait will do their part to put an end to years of low oil prices.
This is a major step forward, and we, with my colleagues, we think that it is a historic moment to come to this agreement, which will definitely help in rebalancing the market, and it will help reducing the stock overhang.
Markets reacted quickly. North Sea Brent crude jumped up 8.5%, the biggest price surge in 10 months. Many analysts say the price hike might be here to stay. Along with OPEC member states who produce around 1/3 of global supply, Russia has also pledged to cut production. And it's possible that other countries will now follow suit.
And let's get some more insight on that story. Janelle Dumoulin is standing by at the Frankfurt Stock Exchange for us. Janelle, what is the market's reaction to the OPEC decision?
After the OPEC decision, Christoph, European shares actually reached a 3-week high. But in Germany, for example, those gains tapered off quite quickly, and the DAX closed yesterday just 0.2% higher, so just a slight difference. And we also are not seeing a very strong start into today's trading day. And that's because traders and investors, after this OPEC decision, have quickly refocused their attention to other issues looming in the week, like Italy's constitutional referendum over the weekend.
You're mentioning it, Italy. There's important economic data coming from Italy today. What exactly are investors eyeing there?
Well, investors are expecting to see data that would put unemployment slightly down in October and manufacturing up in November. But mostly they're hoping that this positive economic data would perhaps work in favor of Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, who, of course, staked his leadership on the upcoming referendum. And they're especially worried that if the referendum doesn't go Renzi's way, then we'll see perhaps new elections, political instability, and a populist surge that would see Italy pushed out of the currency union. So you can bet that this referendum will be watched very closely.
Janelle Dumoulin at the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. Thank you. German business leaders are sounding off about the unresolved dispute between Lufthansa pilots and management. The head of the country's Employers Association says the strikes are threatening jobs, and the head of industrial giant Siemens says the walkouts are a growing threat to business. The last round of strikes ended just yesterday when nearly 100,000 people found their flights cancelled. Over the last 2 weeks, over 500,000 passengers were affected by striking pilots in a dispute that has dragged on for 2 years now. The pilots are striking over more pay. All right, time to talk some fast food here. I like mine without the pickles. The Big Mac is a hamburger that rose to global fame. It has become an international food standard, with The Economist even publishing the Big Mac Index as a way of comparing purchasing power across the world. Now, the inventor of the Big Mac, Michael Delagatti, has died, aged 98, at his home in Pennsylvania. He came up with the idea of a double beef patty sandwich in 1965 when heading a McDonald's franchise in Pittsburgh. 3 years later, the fast food giant introduced the Big Mac to its regular menu. And that's all your business for the moment. Back to you, Sarah.
I have indigestion just thinking about that, Christoph. Thank you very much for your reporting. We're going to turn to Thailand now because it has proclaimed a new king. The accession of 64-year-old Crown Prince Maha Vajiralongkorn is currently being formalized as we speak. Now, this will complete the succession process and will see the Crown Prince become King Rama X. The prince had requested a waiting period in October after the death of his father, a much-loved figure revered as a unifying force in Thailand. In contrast, his son is controversial. He is known for his playboy lifestyle, for choosing to spend most of his time abroad. Let's bring in Bastian Hartig, who is standing by for us in Bangkok. So, Bastian, a new king for Thailand. What is going to happen?
Well, after the religious ceremony that we're seeing, the regent, who's currently standing in for the Crown Prince, will lead the Prime Minister of the country and the Chairman of Parliament, as well as the President of the Supreme Court, to an audience with the Crown Prince. And then the President of Parliament or the Chairman of Parliament is going to invite the Crown Prince to ascend to the throne. Now, that's an invitation that the Crown Prince has already signaled he's going to accept, and then after that there will be an official proclamation. Now, that is not the actual coronation, because that won't take place until after his father, the late King Bhumibol Adulyadej, has been cremated, which presumably will not happen until late next year. But having said that, there are several events scheduled in honor of the late king in the coming days. Most importantly, probably his birthday, which is on Monday, and it's very likely that the new king will play an important role in those festivities.
So the coronation taking place a little bit later, but we're currently looking at live pictures. Bastian, can you tell us a little bit about what's happening right now in Thailand?
Well, there is a religious ceremony going on at the moment, and then, as I said, after that, there will be this audience where that invitation will be brought to the Crown Prince, and after that will be the proclamation of him as a king. Now, of course, the importance of the monarchy and of the king, we see this ceremony going on at the moment, and we see how highly revered the late King Bhumibol Adulyadej is, and I think it's very important to look at his persona to understand how important the monarchy in Thailand really is, because he was on the throne for 70 years. Many Thais never knew a different king, and he very much embodied the monarchy. And he, in his time as king, he really he accumulated a lot of power as well, also political power, because he was so highly revered by the people, and he was so highly accepted elected by the people. Now, he's leaving big shoes to fill, and many people in Thailand are now hoping that their new king, King Rama X, the late king's son, will follow the example set by his father.
Bastian Harteg with the latest from Bangkok. Thank you. Well, how do you steal a bucket full of gold flakes worth $1.6 million? Well, don't think too hard here, because the video that you're about to show shows how one man in New York did just that. Check it out. We see him walking off with the bucket there, and apparently it took the man an hour to walk up the street, weighed down by his loot. He still managed to escape, though. Police believe that he is currently hiding out in Florida. A quick reminder now of our top stories before we have to go. Russian President Vladimir Putin has given his annual State of the Nation address in Moscow. He said that Russia is ready to take part in solving global problems and is looking forward to working with the new U.S. administration under Donald Trump next year. The UN's humanitarian chief has warned that Aleppo risks becoming a giant graveyard as intense fighting continues between government and rebel forces. You're up to date on DW News. I'm Sarah Kelly in Berlin. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'll see you at